So picture this. It's 1981. We're right at the height of the Cold War, and a speech is given that lays out this incredibly detailed blueprint for a brand new world order. Today, we're going to unpack that vision from Sun Myung-moon. It's this really fascinating and complex mix of spirituality, geopolitics, and a deep sense of global crisis.
Right off the bat, the speech sets the stakes unbelievably high with this proclamation. So we're not talking about small tweaks here. This is about a complete and total transformation of the world, and it's framed as the ultimate fulfillment of what both God and humanity have wanted all along.
So, how does a vision this massive even begin to unfold? Well, we're going to break it down into 5 key parts. First, we'll look at what the speech sees as the world's #1 problem. Then, we'll get into the search for unity, the pretty surprising idea of Korea's central role, a wild infrastructure proposal, and finally, the one single value that's supposed to hold this entire thing together.
Okay, let's dive right in. According to this speech, the most serious fight happening in modern society isn't what you'd think. It's not really between nations or ideologies. No, it's something way more fundamental, the huge gap between the rich and the poor.
This speech paints this really stark picture of the world back in 1981. It basically breaks the global population into 3 economic classes. You've got about 800 million people in the upper class, mostly in the Northern Hemisphere. Then there's this massive 3 billion in Asia's middle class, and finally 500 million in the lower class of Africa and Latin America. This giant economic divide that's framed as the absolute core of the North-South problem, the biggest conflict of the time. Now, what's super interesting here is the specific role that's given to Asia. By positioning the continent as this global middle class, the speech argues that it's in a totally unique position to be a bridge, a mediator that can actually unite the world's economic extremes. So then the speech turns to communism, which was, of course, a huge historical attempt to solve this very class struggle. And it acknowledges communism's ideal of a classless world, but it says there's a fatal flaw. Its whole foundation is atheistic. So as an alternative, it proposes this new ideology called Godism. It's presented as this third way, something that's meant to go beyond both the godless materialism of communism and what it saw as the limits of secular humanism. All right, so if the old political and economic ideas aren't going to cut it, what's the answer? Well, the speech suggests a completely different kind of tool for creating this global unity. The argument here is that the original purpose of religion was always about saving the world, not just saving individuals. So, if you want to solve a world-sized problem like class division, you need a new religious movement to act as the core, the central point for that unity to happen. And that brings us right back to this core concept of Godism. It's really presented as the philosophical engine for this new world. And the central idea is that God's love is the one absolute, unchanging value that can actually bring everybody together, for real. But this whole vision, it's not just some abstract idea about philosophy and religion. The speech argues it has a very, very specific geographical center. And this is where the focus suddenly narrows in big time and shifts to the idea of Korea's prophetic destiny. Now, this is where the speech lays out a truly wild theory of history. The argument is that the center of world civilization has been constantly moving westward, but in a really specific pattern. It goes from continental powers like Egypt to peninsular ones like Greece and Rome, then to island nations like Britain. And if you follow that pattern through America and then Japan, the speech concludes that all this civilizational energy is now coming together at its final destination, the Korean Peninsula. So, what's the bottom line of this historical view? It's a bold declaration. The era that was dominated by the Atlantic powers is ending. It's making way for a new age, one that's centered on the Pacific, where Eastern and Western civilizations are basically meant to come together and merge. So why Korea specifically? The text gives a few reasons. First, you've got its unique geopolitical position, literally stuck between the 4 major powers of the time. But it also points to the character of the Korean people themselves, describing them as having a really strong sense of justice, being naturally religious, and having great adaptability. Okay, now we get to the most concrete, hands-on proposal in the entire speech. This is the plan to physically kickstart this new age of unity with a truly massive infrastructure project. And this is where things get incredibly ambitious. The proposal is for a Great Asian Highway. The plan is to literally physically connect China, Korea, and Japan with a highway, maybe even including an underwater tunnel. The idea is that this physical connection would spark this huge wave of economic and cultural exchange and eventually create a unified Asian common community. But the goals of this project are way bigger than just economics. It's actually presented as a tool for peace. The belief was that this level of free exchange would make North Korea's isolation impossible to maintain, basically compelling it toward peaceful unification. Then, a united Asia could finally step up and fulfill its destiny as that global mediator we talked about earlier. So, the crucial point here, and this is really important, is that behind all the geopolitical theories and the giant construction plans, there is one core spiritual principle that is supposed to be the engine for this whole vision. This speech defines God's love in a very specific way. It's not some top-down force. Instead, it's described as being spherical, able to move freely in every direction, from the highest points of society to the lowest. And it's this quality, the speech argues, that allows it to create harmony and be welcomed by everyone, making true unity actually possible. And this brings us to the final summary of Korea's mission, all powered by this idea of love. The nation is tasked with bringing unity to 4 key areas. First, religion, by harmonizing the world's faiths. Second, thought, by overcoming communism. Third, culture, by merging East and West. And finally, the economy. And here's the final takeaway. The speech ends by restating its main point, that this spiritual foundation, this very specific understanding of God's love, is the only way to get to a global peace that's real and that actually lasts.
So, this 1981 blueprint, it offers one incredibly ambitious answer, right? It blends geopolitics, economics, and a very distinct theology into a single vision for the future. And it leaves us with a massive question that feels just as relevant today as it did back then. What does it truly take to unite a deeply divided humanity?